So last week, DeepSeek released V4 Flash, and I kind of brushed it off as it only scored 52 points on the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index, which is 8 points behind Kimi K3, and it slots between GLM 5.2 and Gemini 3.6 Flash. The part that I completely missed though was its cost. To run the entire test suite at Artificial Analysis, it costs $72 with this model. That is 10 times cheaper than models with the same intelligence scores, and 33 times cheaper than Kimi K3. So this is definitely one to check out, and it's a pretty interesting model, so let's get into it. So the model is called DeepSeek V4 Flash 0731, and the TLDR of the model is it's got 300 billion parameters, with 13 billion of those being active, it has a million token context window, and its weights are on Hugging Face already with an MIT license. If we jump straight to the benchmarks, as I mentioned in the intro, it scores a 52 on the intelligence index, so it's not a frontier model, but if we look at this in the context of other models around it, like these 21 here, you can see that it slots in nicely with Gemini 3.6 and 3.5 Flash, GPT 5.6 Luna on max effort, GLM 5.2 on max, Opus 5 on low, and it's 4 points ahead of Kimi K3 on a low effort. If I switch this over to the agentic index, you can see out of those same models, DeepSeek is actually the third best one. So it's definitely not state of the art, but pricing is where it dominates. If we take those same 21 models, but we look at cost per task, you can see that DeepSeek V4 Flash is actually the cheapest out of all of the models, and GPT 5.6 Luna, that costs the same, is actually 2 points behind on the intelligence index. If you compare this to other open models like Kimi K3 on low, which again is worse on intelligence, it's actually 8 times cheaper, and the same goes for GLM 5.2. It's about 18 times cheaper than the Gemini models, and it gets the same score as them, and obviously it's a lot cheaper than Sonnet 5. And all of this is despite the fact that it uses the third most output tokens on all of these tasks across all of the models, which is a pretty crazy result. If we look at a graph of the intelligence versus cost, you can see it's incredibly close to that most attractive quadrant. Models like GLM 5.2, GPT 5.6 Terra, and Muse Spark are in there, but they're actually only 1 point ahead of DeepSeek V4 Flash, and that 1 point difference would come at 9 times the price, so it's probably not worth it. You can even see on a benchmark like ArcAGI that it stands out in a place of its own because it's much cheaper than any other model for its performance level. And by the way, on this benchmark, it actually beats Kimi K3 on a max effort and is 20 times cheaper. As for the raw cost of the tokens themselves, from DeepSeek, they advertise 14 cents for a million input tokens and 28 cents for a million output tokens. But if you go to OpenRouter, other providers have got this cheaper, and the average is around 8 cents for a million input tokens and 25 cents for a million output tokens. When you compare this to other models in its intelligence level, it is just so much cheaper. But how well does it do in actual use? I took DeepSeek V4 Flash and then 7 other similar comparing models, tested them out in open code with the exact same prompt to create me a personal finance management dashboard, create a full stack application that includes a front end and a back end, and I gave them all an empty folder, so they are starting completely from scratch. Now, this is the result that I got back from DeepSeek V4 Flash. It actually turned out to be the second cheapest and also the 6th quickest, so it's a little bit slow there, and I'll show you a full chart at the end of how these models compare. What we can see though is we do have a semi-working CRUD app. There's something going wrong with the responsiveness and the sizing of these cards here, but everything else is working. The charts are pretty nice and working. All of this add funds and send money, I've tested that out and that did work as well. And we can also see that the accounts, transactions, and goals pages here are also working too. As for the UI design of this, I would say it's pretty standard for what I expect out of some of these AI models. Maybe the frontier ones are using a bit of a different design these days, but this just has that very AI CRUD app feel. I'm pretty happy with the stack it shows as well. We're using React, although it is using React 18 and not 19. It's using recharts for the charts, which is a sensible choice, and it's also using V on the front end here. For the server, we're using Express and Cores, and bonus points here because it did actually use a real database using Node SQLite. Next up, we have the result that we got back from GPT 5.6 Luna on a max effort, and I've got to say, I had to double check that I chose the right model here, as this UI is just way better than the one we got back from DeepSeek, and this actually only cost me 6 cents and took 6 minutes to make. Now, one thing worth knowing is that OpenRouter currently has a discount on GPT 5.6 Luna, so it is 50% off, so this would have cost 12 cents if we weren't under the discount, so only a few cents more than DeepSeek's, and I think this UI is definitely worth that price difference. As for the features, I have tested and we can add funds and send money, but we can't go to accounts, transactions, or goals. All of that just has to be on this main page here. It hasn't actually implemented those tabs. It does lose a few points, however, on the stack it shows. It did choose React 19, V, and also Express for the server. When it comes to the actual database, it just did all of it in memory in this file here. But obviously, this is something that you could modify the original prompt with and just say include a real database. So both of those models cost us under 10 cents, but I want to go to the other end of the spectrum now and take a look at what Opus 5 gave us on a low effort. This cost me $9.65, which is over 160 times more expensive than those other models. You can see here it does have a fairly nice UI. It's a pretty standard CRUD app as we've seen. It's more similar to the DeepSeek one than it is to GPT 5.6. And I will say what Opus has done really well is the UI inside some of these features. So when we transfer or send money, I think this is a really well-built UI. And all of these features work as well. So it's got the accounts, transaction, budgets, goals, and investment pages. When it comes to the actual code, it shows a fairly standard React stack, as we can see here. But where it gets negative points is on the database, because again, it's used an Express database, but this one has used an in-memory data store and not a real database. Now, I'm going to go a bit quicker through the other 5 models. This one here is GLM 5.2 on extra high. It was actually the second most expensive, costing me $3.68, and it also took the longest of 47 minutes. I would say it's done a fairly good job though. This looks like a standard CRUD app that a lot of these models are producing, and it's got all of the features like dashboard, accounts, transactions, and goals, and we can even click on these and everything is working. It did also choose a pretty good stack for the backend. It actually elected to use Next.js. It's the only model to do so, and it used a real database linked with Prisma. Gemini 3.6 Flash is next, and it was actually the 6th most expensive, costing me $1.69, and also the 5th quickest at 11 minutes. Now, for the job it's done, I wouldn't say it's great. I mean, it does have all of the charts and all of the information, and a pretty similar look to some of the other apps. It's chosen a top nav bar up here, and just overall, everything looks a bit more clustered than I think some of the other examples we've seen, and it's a bit of a shame. Gemini used to have the UI advantage, but it's really gone over to OpenAI now. This also uses a pretty normal stack, so it chose React and Express, but it is storing its data in a JSON file. After that, we then have GPT 5.5 on a medium effort, and this was actually the 5th most expensive at $1.15, but it was the 3rd quickest, taking only 7 minutes. Now, it's done a bit of a weird job here compared to the rest of them. It's done everything in a single page. UI design, I would say, is fairly nice. It is that OpenAI UI design that a lot of these apps have that we've already seen, and everything is working. It's just not really a full stack application. It's more of just a single page app. It did use React and Express for its stack though, but it chose an in-memory data store. This is the last GPT model that I tested, and it's GPT 5.6 Sol on a low effort. This is actually the 4th cheapest, costing me only 90 cents, and it was the quickest, only taking 3 minutes and 42 seconds. You can see it's a pretty similar UI design to Luna, and in my opinion, this is the best UI that we got out of all of the models that I tested, and all of these features are working, like the add funds here, but it doesn't have the accounts, transactions, budgets, or goal pages. None of those tabs work. It also picked the pretty standard stack of React and Express, but it does have an in-memory data store. Finally, the last model that I tested was Kimi K3 on a low effort. This is actually the 3rd cheapest, coming in at 58 cents, and the 4th fastest, taking me 8 minutes. I've got to say though, I'm not blown away by the UI design that we have here. Technically, it is all functional, just looks a bit similar to the DeepSeek one. I'd say it's on the same level as that, but all of the features are working, and it actually went with a weird approach for its stack. It chose vanilla.js, so it didn't use any framework, but it did use Express, and it also did have JSON file as its database. I may have gone a bit overboard with the number of tests that I did here, but I really wanted to see how these models with similar scores would stack up. If we take a look at the rankings that I got for my cost per run, I think GPT 5.6 Luna was definitely the winner here. We got a really nice UI design for 6 cents. Again, without the discount, that would cost 12 cents, so it's a bit more expensive than DeepSeek, 50% more, but for that UI design difference, it is definitely a winner. Opus 5, I wouldn't use that for any of these tasks. Opus 5 on a low effort costing me $9.65, when we have models that can cost us under $1 and give us super impressive results like GPT 5.6 Sol. One thing I will say though is the code base for DeepSeek V4 Flash, the actual backend and the code was really good in comparison to something like GPT 5.6 Luna, where it chose a real database, so maybe I'd use an OpenAI model for the UI design and DeepSeek V4 Flash for some of the backend code, and that way I get the best of both worlds. When it comes to how long each of these models actually ran for, DeepSeek was pretty bad here. It took 23 minutes. When you compare that to something like 5.6 Sol, which only took 3 minutes and 42 seconds to create that super impressive result, I do think it could do a bit of work on its speed, but again, since it's so cheap, does it really matter? Overall, I think DeepSeek V4 Flash is a pretty competent model, just maybe not great at UI design, and that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I'm certainly enjoying this trend of the Chinese labs coming in and undercutting the US labs on the pricing and also matching their intelligence, as it might start a price war that benefits all of us, and I think we've already seen that from OpenAI. They have some really cheap pricing for some really competent models. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below if you would use this model. While you're there, subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.